Hi, it's Carlos Valdez-Stepana, back with you once again. I'm the author of the book Lessons from Mars, How One Global Company Cracked the Code on High-Performance Collaboration and Teamwork. And this is the third in a series of podcasts I'm doing about my work, about the book, and other insights into how to build team effectiveness. So in a previous episode, I mentioned that while working with teams at Mars, was a little bit uneasy about the methodology I was employing. The basis of my work, my foundational tool, was Tuckman's 4 stages of team development. Those 4 stages, you might recall, are forming, storming, norming, and performing. A standard in team development, and really something that's been around since the 1960s. I was asked, as I mentioned in a previous episode, to create or be part of a team that created a module that would be going into a core Mars management development program, the module on teamwork. And I was just not comfortable with that methodology, the 4 stages that I'd been using at Mars and I'd used previously in my career. I didn't really know why. Yes, I was a little nervous about the fact that it was a psychological model and that we're trying to put something in the hands of managers who don't necessarily have the skills of a trained consultant or facilitator. But there was something else, and I never could quite put my finger on it up to that point. And as I was doing my research and thinking about many of the engagements I'd done at Mars, because I was poring over all this data, an episode occurred to me and a light came on. So several years earlier, I'd worked with one of the smaller Mars businesses, Mars Horse Care. They're based in a little town in Ohio. They're a relatively small business. The Mars family is passionate about horses, and it fits in with the larger Mars Pet Care business. But anyway, I've been asked to go work with this team. They'd worked with a couple of these external consultants that I had mentioned in the previous podcast. And I was asked to go help them out. They were struggling a little bit, the leadership team of this group. And so I did what I do. I talked earlier about the surveys and the interviews I do. I conducted that with this team of 6. Brought all that data into the room, and I think it was a Holiday Inn in the middle of Ohio somewhere. And I typically take all the interviews and I anonymize it. I strip out all the names, I strip out anything that might give an indication of who said what. And I shared with them a report, it was probably 5 or 6 pages long, that summarized the survey and the interviews. And as I almost always did, I said, why don't you break up into, in this case, 2 groups of 3, and have a look at this data that I'm sharing with you. And I want you to come back and tell me, as if this weren't your team, what's going on with this team that's represented in the data. And one of the questions I asked, there were 4 or 5 I typically sent them away with, was, what stage of the 4 stages would you say this team that you're analyzing here is in? And being dutiful Mars associates, they marched off. They had 25 or 30 minutes to go over the data and come back with some conclusions. And they came back into the room right on time, and they put their conclusions on flip charts, and we put them up on the wall and formed a U around them with our chairs and sat there and started talking about them. And we got to the part about what stage are you at? And one of these subgroups said, we're at stage 1, and another of the subgroups said, we're at stage 3. And so we had some conversation back and forth about where they actually thought they were. Was there a consensus they could reach? And eventually we got to the place of them saying, well, probably more like stage 2. And that was pretty much where I would have put them. Okay. When we reach this consensus, I'm feeling pretty good at this point. One of the team says, hang on a second. And he brings the whole process to a halt. I said, okay, what's up? He said, look, you're the 3rd or 4th person that's been in here to do this with us. And every single time one of you consultants comes in here, you tell us we're at stage 2. Every time. So, first of all, that's frustrating. But in my view, you're coming in here to help us and we're not getting anywhere. Something's wrong. Something's wrong with your model, something's wrong with your consulting, but something's wrong. He was right. He was exactly right. Something was wrong. Something about Tuckman's model wasn't helping people move on to improvement, to do something better. It was certainly telling them where they were. It was a diagnostic. It was interesting, but it wasn't practical. It wasn't really something they could use. So here's the thing. A stage-based model it's linear, right? 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, as if the progression were predictable. That linearness, if that's even a word, really doesn't reflect the reality of the corporate world I've been working in for the past 25 plus years. I mean, life in a big company, including Mars, is so nonlinear. It goes in all sorts of directions at once. Teams form and reform and add new members and change strategy. Life moves in sometimes erratic and unpredictable ways that a linear model can't account for. And what's interesting about this is that this framework of Tuckman's was based on work he did with articles that reported on therapy groups. Therapy groups. And there's nothing wrong with that inherently. Therapy groups are a good thing. But if you're comparing data from 50 therapy groups, which have no goals specifically, and they don't have hard annual financial targets, they aren't trying to follow a specific strategy, etc., they're quite different from what we see in the organizational world that I work in. No wonder the model didn't work. It comes from a different time. It comes from a different set of assumptions. It comes from a different kind of group, right? That was an important insight. That was a really important insight. And it changed the direction of my work as a consultant. And I'd have to say, it changed me as a person. It helped me understand something different was needed. And again, Mars was different. The world I was working with was different from the world Tuckman worked with. We needed something that reflected that differentness. And that's part of what informed the work the team and I did around building this framework. It's not different for the sake of being different, by the way. It's different because something new was needed. And again, we'll continue with these podcasts. I want to give you more background here. There are some other assumptions about team effectiveness that I want to tackle before we get into the underpinnings of the framework and the framework itself. And I'm looking forward to continuing this exploration with you. Thanks very much. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, or you can contact me through my website, lessonsfrommars.net. That's lessonsfrommars.net. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, or you can contact me through my website, lessonsfrommars.net. That's lessonsfrommars.net.